The people are weary. They've been traveling for miles now. They have wandered around following this pillar of cloud and fire for over a month. They've been thirsty. They've seen God provide them with clean water to drink. For a short time, they got to rest at Elim, a beautiful place with 12 springs surrounded by palm trees. Then all too soon, the pillar starts to move again. Do we have to go now? The wilderness will be there next week, Moses. And yet, the pillar moves, and faithfully they step out and follow. As they strike camp, some of their joy and vigor that they had a month ago at the beginning of their journey has gone. Their heads aren't quite so high, their shoulders not quite so proud. Their feet drag a little. They're tired. And it occurs to them, one by one, that they are the farthest they have ever been away from home. Until they remember that they don't really have a place to call home anymore. And that is a troubling thought, even if home was awful before. So now they follow, not knowing that Sinai lies ahead, not knowing exactly where the promised land will be or what awaits them there. All they know is that they have been given directions to follow and that there is a home that is better waiting for them somewhere in the future. And one day, as they travel about the wilderness, the food begins to run out. A few days later, the stores are completely gone. They make camp and there is nothing left to feed their hungry children who whine and cry for food. There is nothing to fill themselves after a long day's march. And so they go to the one person who seems to have a direct line to connect with God. And their tone is not patient. Moses, why did you bring us here away from Egypt to die? In Egypt, we had food. We had as much meat and bread as we wanted. It would be better to live as a slave in Egypt with food than to die of hunger in the wilderness here. Once again, ready to give up freedom and take the troubles of yesterday that are known over the uncertain future when hardship comes. Moses and Aaron are understandably frustrated at the accusatory tone. After God has done so much, after they have been faithful in following God, in guiding these people, they're frustrated. But God does not communicate frustration to Moses or the Israelites at this legitimate complaint that they are hungry. And so God says to Moses, I have heard the complaining of the Israelites, and this is what I want you to say to them. At twilight, you will eat meat. In the morning, you will have your fill of bread. You will know that I am the Lord your God. I will rain bread down from heaven that my people can collect each day. I'm going to test them to see if they will follow my instructions. Tell them to only gather enough food for the one day, except on the Sabbath. The seventh day will be a day of holy, sacred rest for you. So the day before that, gather twice as much. And so Moses and Aaron, weary and hungry themselves, return frustrated to the Israelites. And they bring the message. But first they have a bit of a message of their own. Who are we that you're going to complain to us? Your problem is not with us, it's with God. But God has a message for you. This evening, you will know once again that the Lord is the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord, because God has heard your complaining. God will give you your fill of meat and bread. Draw near to God, for God has heard you. And as Aaron speaks to the congregation of the Israelites, they look towards the wilderness, and they see, as Moses and Aaron tell them, that the glory of the Lord has indeed followed them even here. Just as God promised, evening comes, and much like the swarms of grackles we see here, the camp is filled with quail. There are loud shouts. People are very happy because they realize there will be meat tonight, fresh meat that they can roast over their fires. And for the first time in a while, the people go to bed filled and hopeful that God's promise will come through the next day and they will indeed receive that bread for breakfast. And the people wake up. As the dew lifts, they see a thin, flaky substance on the ground. They say, "Manna, what is this?" And Moses says, "It's the bread God promised, just like God said would happen." A brave soul lifts some to their lips. And the cry comes out, "It's sweet!" And they all begin to taste, to see that God is good, to learn that bread from heaven tastes like honey and wafers, as the text tells us. The people cried out, as they have all throughout Exodus again and again when troubles occur. And in the face of doubts and fears and complaints, God delivers once again. God has rescued them, and now God sustains them. God provides for their need to eat and also for another need which they might not have learned to verbalize themselves yet because they are so used to this need not being met. The Lord invites weary people to rest. God looks at a group of formerly enslaved people who just recently earned their freedom and said, "Hey, with that newfound freedom, here's something new for you to try. One day a week, just rest, just be. Let it be a holy act of trust in my faithfulness that the next day will be taken care of." It's easier to be pleasant and to have faith when you've slept and when you're well fed. I think looking back, one of the first serious conversations I had with Albert was about holy rest. Way back in 2018, we were sitting in the activity building with a group of young aspiring ministers, and our teacher said, "Well, Albert, what advice would you give to all of these people who hope one day to be serving in churches and other places around the world?" And he says, "Remember to rest. Remember that rest is not just about rejuvenating for the next task tomorrow so that you don't die. Resting is an act of faith. It is acknowledging and remembering that the world doesn't turn because of us, that you and I are not the ones who sustain life on this planet. When we rest, we acknowledge that taking care of this world as we sleep is God's job, that we were not meant to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. It's a difficult lesson in this culture because in our society, the first expected follow-up question to "what is your name" is, "what do you do?" We are trained to value productivity and work and a strong work ethic above most other things here. To work constantly, to accumulate things for the next rainy day, to put off rest till retirement. To work constantly and chase after what we need for today and what we hope to have for tomorrow. And it is a point of pride when we are constantly busy. That's our favorite thing to say when people say, "How are you?" "I'm busy." "Oh, I'm working so hard." Working to exhaustion on a daily basis has become a virtue in this society, in a society that assigns a monetary value to everything, including our time and our health. I don't know how old I was when I first heard someone say, a very well-meaning, hardworking person, "Oh, I'll rest when I'm dead." And our society rewards them for that behavior, applauds them for standing strong, for prioritizing the right things so that things can keep being produced. But the truth is, our bodies were not meant to work tirelessly until we send ourselves into an early grave. Our shoulders are not meant to carry the weight that belongs to God. It's easy to put off rest, to say, oh, next semester my class load is easier. I'll rest next semester. To say, oh, well, after I've finished this grading for midterms, then I can rest. After I've finished this work at this one construction site, then I can schedule a day to have off of work. After we've finished repainting the house, after we've cleaned, after the kids go to sleep, then and only then can we rest. And then, of course, the next thing comes. And we keep pushing it off again and again until the day that we die. When we idolize busyness, as we do, if we're honest, in this society, we forget that much like manna in the wilderness, rest is a sweet thing. It is a good thing. It is a life-sustaining thing that we need. And just as the Israelites had to learn to trust God's faithfulness to give them bread the next day, we must learn to trust God's faithfulness, that God can watch over the worries of tomorrow when today's work is done. Perhaps if we take the time to remember that we are created beings and not the creator ourselves, maybe then we would remember that we are subject to the forces of this world, to the rising and the setting of the sun, to the tiredness we feel when we push ourselves too far. And then we could have the humility to leave God's work to God and to keep our own work for ourselves. Worrying about what is coming in the future all throughout the night, worrying about those incomplete tasks that didn't get done, will do nothing to add to our lives, neither their length nor their joy. Misery and exhaustion do not aid us in pursuing those virtues which we have been told mark the life of a believer: joy, peace, the things that Paul tells us should just be evident in our lives as those who follow Christ. Throughout the Exodus, God began with this major self-introduction, this big dramatic moment, disclosing many things about God's self, that God is a rescuer, that God hears, that God steps in big, miraculous, dramatic ways, that God fights for God's people, that God wins. And here, this God who has just won a great war on behalf of the Israelites shows something else about God's self. That God also cares for those simple, everyday needs. God cares that they are hungry. God cares that they are tired. And God will provide for what they need along the way. The simple provision of food feels a lot less climactic than parting the Red Sea. It's not so dramatic as all of the 10 plagues. Somehow a God who feeds people doesn't feel as glorious as a God who wins wars. And yet this act of divine grace, of giving what is needed for that day, is every bit as important, perhaps more important on the regular day in, day out basis, as it is needed every day. God has sent many miracles that step into the working of time, that demonstrate that God rules the cosmos, that God has more power than any earthly king or kingdom. And now, God shows that God also cares about sustaining the life of hungry children. It's an everyday sort of miracle, one that meets an everyday sort of need. And it won't be long until the Israelites, who are marveling and wondering and shouting with joy today, will be complaining about this manna they eat. Moses, we only have the miracle bread from heaven to eat. And it's easy to laugh at their folly because it is foolish. And it's easy to ignore that foolishness in ourselves. What good are stored up riches if we are too busy accumulating them and exhausting ourselves to ever enjoy them before we die? Busyness can make us feel very important, but it doesn't do a lot to actually improve our lives or the world that we live in. Now, the Israelites didn't get this perfectly the first time that the manna came, right? We know the story. Some of them hold on to that feeling of acute hunger that they felt, and they do exactly what God told them not to do. They store up food for the next day, and they find it filled with maggots and mold and growing things, and it's disgusting. And they learned that the fresh manna came the next day anyway. And again, some of them remembering that feeling of disgust when they opened those jars, failed to gather on the sixth day to provide for the seventh, and wake up on the seventh to find that no, God did mean it when God said we are to rest this day. Maybe this is a God we should heed. And so they continue to learn, to trust the things that God has said. It's a process to leave behind mindsets of accumulating things for fear of the lack that will come in the future. It is a process to learn to rest after years of enslavement. In the same way, it is a process and takes time for us in a society that pushes us constantly to create, to do, to learn to just be, to exist peacefully for a moment, to lay aside guilt that the work for tomorrow isn't done today, and take a moment to exist in holy rest and peace. In a few moments, we're going to be invited, as we are every week, to experience God's provision, to partake of the bread of life. Our job is a simple one if it isn't always easy, to let go of busyness, to exist, to receive the gifts of God, to taste and see that God is indeed still good, to receive the gifts that come from communing together in this place, or the gifts that come for those of you on Zoom, with finding creative ways to be together when we cannot physically exist in this space. So as you go about your week and you leave this place, may you find that you have enough food to be full, enough water to drink, enough of a cool breeze to make it through the hot days in Abilene, enough rest to make it to the next day, enough peace to lay aside tomorrow's worries and let tomorrow worry about itself. May you find that just as God was faithful to the Israelites so many hundreds of years ago, God is faithful to provide for your needs today.